Hey guys, welcome back, it's Vic, and today's video is going to be a little bit different because I'm doing my first ever collab video with Kristen from College Lead. Kristen is a recent Harvard grad who has a ton of useful college application tip videos on her own channel, so definitely feel free to head over there to check her out afterwards. We also did a video on her channel answering common assumptions about Ivy League students, so definitely check out that video after watching this one. In this video coming up, I speak to Kristen about her entire Harvard process, from when she was applying to Harvard as a homeschooled student to her time in Harvard, and now what life is like after Harvard. So it turns out the video ended up being way too long for all of this to be discussed in this video. So in this video, we're going to be talking about her pre-Harvard application process, and we'll talk about her experiences in Harvard and post-Harvard in next week's video. Stay tuned for that. Check out the timestamps in the description below if you would like to, but there are amazing learnings from our entire conversation, so if you can, watch the whole thing through. Without further ado, let's get right to it. Great, so Kristen, I feel like I haven't gotten to know you yet, so maybe you could start with like a quick introduction with maybe what you did in Harvard and what you're doing right now.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for having me here, Victoria. I'm very excited to be on your channel and also meet other new viewers. So I graduated from Harvard last year in 2019, and there I majored in computational neuroscience. That's just a fancy way for saying I studied neuro, but also dabbled in stats, math, and everything else. Right now, I am a technical product manager at Cengage, which is an ed tech company. And before then, I was working on a startup for a little bit. So yeah, I'm here to answer any questions you have.
Okay, so I think let's start out with like the pre-Harvard application process. I know from your YouTube channel that you were homeschooled for like 10 years. I'm very curious to hear from you with regard to like how you feel like you made yourself stand out in the application, things like that. Was it more challenging as a homeschooled applicant? And yeah, like talk a bit more about what you did to stand out.
Yeah. It's not normal where you see other homeschoolers out there. It was actually hard for me to find any other homeschooler at Harvard, actually. That being said, obviously it's becoming more popular now because of COVID. But yeah, I would say homeschooling definitely has its pros and cons. One con is that I'm not part of a school organization, so there are not clubs that exist already that I can join. And everything has to be sort of create my own, or I seek an external organization to join and then volunteer there. But on the flip side, I have more freedom with what I do with my time. Because in school, obviously it may be different depending on the country, but in the high school I went to here in San Francisco, Bay Area, the bell rang after every single hour and you felt like a sheep being herded from classroom to another. So it was very restricting, and your time was always booked from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. and you didn't get a choice to decide how productive that time would be. So as a homeschooler, I had the freedom to say, okay, well, I'm going to practice for, let's say, 1 hour of flute. That was my main activity in the morning. And then I'll do 2 hours of homework, take a break, eat lunch, and then mix it up with other things that are going on in the day. And then also gave me flexibility to have more time for other extracurriculars like volunteering. So there's a local arts center just in the downtown of the suburb that I live in, and they host performances and they have volunteers who help with ushering. And I mean, in exchange, you get to watch a free show, which is nice. So sometimes there's a show that happens during school hours, and a lot of other students can't make it, but I was able to go. So having flexibility like that is a little nice. You just have to learn how to take the initiative to say, well, I want to build this and I want to build this. So flute was my main extracurricular activity. I auditioned for several orchestras, joined them, but then on the side, I also co-founded a performing arts society for my community. So that's something where you really have to create your own, but you get so much flexibility and freedom to do that. I also alluded to this earlier, but I was homeschooled for 10 years, but my last 2 years of high school, I transferred to a public school. So I wasn't homeschooled the entire way, just FYI.
Okay, got it. I think this is really interesting to me because a lot of people write to me telling me that, you know, they can't find activities that they're interested in joining in school, or they just struggle finding extracurriculars that align with their interests. And I think what you're speaking to is really just that it is possible to not have activities directly available to you through a club in school and still create your own opportunities, which is something that I speak about a lot. Like, I tell people you have to go and craft the opportunities that you want to find if you don't have them immediately available to you. So I would love to dive a little bit deeper into kind of like the extracurriculars you did. You mentioned you did volunteering, you played flute, and you also crafted your own organization. Do you mind talking a little bit more about how you went about the process of creating your own organization, how you went about creating kind of like a specialization in music?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. Let me see, where should I start? This is probably just thanks to my mom, because she encouraged me to start with an instrument when I was very young. It was the piano, and then later I decided I'll switch to the flute around age 12. So it's been something that I have been studying or working on or practicing for a very long portion of my life. And gradually it became something that I enjoyed. And it was something my mom didn't have to tell me, go practice, right? I started practicing on my own. Luckily for her, because I don't know how she would have handled telling me to do that throughout my whole childhood. Gradually, as I progressed in music, I started getting involved in different youth orchestras. And I was able to join sort of the music community here in the Bay Area. I found myself sort of commuting from the suburbs, which is where I live, an hour into San Francisco, the city, for a lot of youth orchestra events, chamber music events, and even seeing my private teacher. So I was wondering if there's anything I could do back home to foster a sort of community of musicians, because I know I have other friends who also make that commute. So I started talking with them, and they turned out to know someone within an adult's version of what we were going to create. And it was called, in Starter County here, Performing Arts Society. So we sort of brainstormed together, my friends and I, and we decided, what if we create a sort of student version of this? And we can have bi-yearly or biannual recitals, and also host different workshops, like how to sight read, how to play with an accompanist, how to do X, Y, and Z, and other things as well. And that's sort of how the whole idea started. It was just being embedded in a community and then finding people who had similar interests and working to start something on your own.
Wow, that's super cool. I think why that really speaks to me is because it really just goes to show that if you really focus on your interests first, kind of the extracurriculars that you want to join or that really shine on your resume to whatever school you're applying to, it will come to you on its own. And so it really reminds me of how I fell into environmental studies. I took a lot of environmental studies activities even before I knew that I wanted to apply to the US. And so I didn't have to worry about, oh my God, what extracurriculars am I going to do? Because I had focused on my interests first and then just joined things that really made me lit my soul on fire. So cringy, but true. And that led me to becoming a very passionate applicant in the eyes of Yale, or maybe in your case, a very passionate musician in the eyes of Harvard. Were there any other extracurriculars that you did, either relating to music or not?
Yeah, for sure. But before that, I just want to sort of add on more to what you said, which is I totally agree with the idea that start with your passion, and then as you embed yourself in that community with other people, either through online forums or just in your local community or local physical community, you'll find other people who share the same interests, and you start finding what opportunities there are. And if there aren't any, find a friend to start it with, and it'll be really fun. Because if you try to find extracurricular with the purpose of what will a college admission officer like, it's very likely that there'll be other students thinking the same thing, and you'll all land and look similar. But if you start from what you're interested in and then develop from there, it'll be more natural and also more impressive, because you will naturally be willing to put more time into that.
Yes, I love that. And something else that I wanted to speak to, which I forgot to mention earlier, was how you talked about how you kind of fell into music, because you started out with the piano, and then you didn't really love that at the time, but then you switched to the flute, and then you fell in love with that gradually. So I think it also goes to show that, passion or your purpose or whatever, it doesn't come to you in a flash of inspiration. It takes time sometimes for you to really develop this passion or these interests. And so to those people who are watching who don't know what the interests are yet or are trying to figure it out, like what kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, I'm sure you also have a lot of advice on this, but my 2 cents is, first of all, explore however much you can in middle school and elementary school, or even in freshman year of high school. Try out a lot of things, and don't just try it out for 1 week or 1 day. Like, dive deep into it and really explore and see, is this something you're willing to put the hard work into to develop this skill to the furthest extent that you can. And once you sort of find that, then gradually narrow down, what am I willing to put my time into, or what do I think I can do well in the limited time I have before I apply to college. And then when college comes, you can explore your other interests if you want, or find new interests. If you decide to put a pause on a particular interest or activity because you have too many, the door is still open to doing that again recreationally in college and beyond that. But again, I would love to also hear what your 2 cents are on this.
I think my 2 cents are really similar to what you were saying. Explore, I think, is a huge thing. Like for me, how I fell into my environmental interest was really just reading the papers. Like reading the papers and realizing that environmental issues kept appearing, and that I was really emotionally moved by that. Like I was very upset and saddened by what I was reading. And I think that's a good indicator as well of something that you're interested in, because if it moves you deeply, that means you care about it. And so I just took that interest further. I just kept reading. I kept, it slowly just morphed into something more. So I just read more papers. I read books, then started consuming documentaries, and then I went for conferences, started volunteering, and it kind of like one thing snowballed into another. And yeah, and then I started like creating my own clubs and stuff, but that came at a much later stage. I think people only really see like the back part and they're like, oh my God, how do I get there?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but you can't leapfrog that whole process of like discovering.
It's a process, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I love this. Okay. It's so great to hear how like people who went to different schools kind of arrived at the same conclusion, like went through the same process.
Even like
exactly across the world.
Yeah, across different time zones too. I'm in San Francisco, you're in Singapore right now, so.
Okay, so next question I have is, which schools did you apply to and get into, and why did you pick Harvard?
I applied to too many schools, I'll just say that right off the bat. And it's not because I chose too many, it's not because the reason why I applied to too many schools is not the standard one that you'll usually think. So at the time, I was a senior in high school. I wasn't sure if I wanted to study music or study biology. And I was overly ambitious and I wanted to have it all. So I looked into a lot of dual degree programs with music performance and also with a strong STEM program. So that led me to apply both to conservatories and also to universities. So if you count the universities I applied to, it's probably around 12. But if you include the conservatories, it just goes up from there. But yeah, I applied to a lot of schools. Like I got into UC Berkeley, UC San Diego, UCLA, UC Davis, the Shepherd School of Music under Rice University, Carnegie Mellon. And Carnegie Mellon has a BXA program where you can choose a STEM major and also pair that with their music program, which was great. Obviously, I got into Harvard. I got into NEC. I also got a likely letter from Columbia University, so I was accepted there. I'm sure there are a few others, but those are like the main ones. And I chose Harvard. Honestly, I had never been to Harvard before. Contrary to popular opinion, you don't need to go to a campus tour to increase your chances of going to the college.
Definitely true. Speaking to all the international students out there,
save yourself some money, do the virtual campus tours, and you can get a better picture of what school life is like by, watching Victoria's YouTube channel, what it's like going to Yale, or watching some of my videos on what it's like going to Harvard. You'll have a better picture there than if you just walked around as a tourist, because you have limited visibility into what campus is like.
I feel like a lot of people apply to Ivy League schools or really good schools just because they think it's a good school, and without actually checking whether they would be a good fit with the school and whether the school actually offers things they're interested in. And I really do like, Kristen, that you kind of focused on what you wanted to study first. Like you focused on music and having a STEM program, and I think that really narrowed down the schools that you applied to. And I think that's really important, right? Instead of just like randomly applying to any school. It also helps you because it means that your application is going to be a lot more cohesive and make a lot more sense. So it increases your chances of getting accepted into the school. For example, if the school has a special program that is offered that you're very interested in. Another great takeaway from your application experience.
Don't make the same mistake I did. Even if you're rejected from your early, your early action school. Like I applied to Stanford early action, got rejected, and I freaked out. I did more safeties than I needed. Don't do that. You only need 2 safeties. Save yourself the money and time. You'll be fine.
Going on to money questions, I'm curious about how's the financial aid like in Harvard?
Harvard's financial aid program is great. Out of all the schools I applied to, Harvard was the most affordable. They gave me the best financial aid package. And this is something that I've heard not only myself say, but also my other friends say as well.
So interesting.
Even international students, actually. Harvard is amazing when it comes to financial aid. They have a lot of wealthy donors who like to give back to the school. And if I'm ever in a position to, I'd also love to give back because honestly, it is a really great program. And I have other friends who are in different financial circumstances where they actually needed a full ride, and Harvard did provide that.
Okay. So depending on your financial background, you will have, they will provide you different degrees of aid. So this means if, you really can't afford, or your parents really can't afford to pay tuition fees, you could potentially get a full ride, meaning that Harvard could pay your entire tuition fee, and the same goes with Yale as well. If I'm not wrong, Harvard is need blind.
Need blind. Their admission is need blind, but their financial aid award is need based. So,
okay. Do you mind elaborating a little bit on that?
Yeah, so a need blind admission means that they won't consider your financial circumstance as a factor of whether to accept you or not. So if you're in a position where you can't afford college, that won't negatively or even positively impact your chances of getting into the school, which is obviously a good thing because it helps to put everyone on the same sort of ruler. But how they give financial aid to the students who have been accepted is based on how much money the student needs. And then I don't know what the process is like for international students, but in the US, you need to have a FAFSA and then have other forms. You send them to your school, they'll take a look at it, and that has sort of the income level of your family, as well as any other children in the family who may be going to college and will have to pay for college soon. So they take those into consideration, and then they'll give you a financial aid package based on the need that you've demonstrated. So that's what I mean by need-based financial aid. That's as opposed to something like merit-based financial aid, where they'll give you financial aid if they like you as a student because of your accomplishments. But having need-based financial aid is a lot more helpful because the money is actually going to the people who need it.
Exactly. And it's the same for Yale. So Yale is also need-blind admissions and need-based financial aid. And I would say, I know for international students, the financial aid process is exactly the same. I also want to talk about test scores really quick because I know people are going to ask. So I honestly don't remember my high school test scores, but I know my SATs weren't like top. I think they were like the bottom 30, 40 percentile, 30. I don't even know. I don't remember because mine was the old SAT. Maybe you could as well speak to grades, test scores, things, and maybe how you found that factoring into your acceptance.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually talk about this in one of my YouTube videos where I revealed what's on my Harvard admission file, and there.
Link up here or up here.
Yeah, feel free to check it out. I won't tell you my exact scores, but I'll share how Harvard will sort of evaluate you. So they have a score from 1, which is kind of like outstanding, down to 6, which is probably below average or poor. But let's just say in terms of the ACT, because that hasn't really changed as much. So let's say if you score 35 to 36, then that'll be a score of 1. If you score like a 33 to 34, that will be a score of 2, and then so on and so on. And I had a score of 2 in my admission file for my academics. And that includes both my grades, my test scores from the SAT, APs, subject tests, etc. I didn't have perfect scores, but I was still able to get in because of strong extracurriculars, or at least that's what it looked like from my admission file. So I think Yale has a similar process, but they look at each applicant holistically and they don't consider just the test score.
Okay, and also I wanted to take this time here to announce to everyone watching, because I know there's a lot of international students watching, that Kristen's case goes to show that you really don't need to go through the American school system to be qualified to get into the Ivy League. They really don't, or even any school in the US. They really consider you on a case-by-case basis. So if your country only offers one type of schooling system, or you're homeschooled, right, it really doesn't matter as long as you do your best and you take full advantage of the resources, academic or otherwise, available to you, that really does come through on the application. So you don't have to be worried about that. I know a lot of people write to me being concerned that they can't do the IB or they don't know what AP classes are. Like, that's fine. Just do your best in whatever education system that you're in. Okay, so I feel like we spend so much time on this part. Okay, we need to move on.
That's helpful.
Very, very helpful. But I feel like I want to move on into like the during Harvard time now.
Yeah,
so,
sure.